I would say I put a huge impact on three things. First is being realistic. Second is being professional, and third is integrity
Do you think you stepped into that role too soon?
and being able to communicate clearly to people or criticize others in a way that doesn't hurt them.
Because I guess alongside that, you also have to learn how each person within your team likes to be communicated with, right? Not only your own emotional intelligence, but also understand how they like to be spoken to,
That
which I
when
think
you
is
work on open source, you really grow professionally because the amount of critics you're going to receive will be immense,
convenient. So I will
right?
try and help where I can, but I'm still learning myself. I think people respect that quite a lot.
When there's this small environment, you can be fast, you can be impactful, you can be creative because
Hello and welcome to Behind the Blockchain. Today I'm joined by Bogdan Gusiev, CTO and co-founder of Unstoppable Domains. Bogdan, thanks for joining me today. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you.
Great.
Glad to be
So
here.
Bogdan, great. So Bogdan, for people who don't know who you are, could you introduce yourself, please?
hmm to people that don't know me, I usually say I'm a software developer, to be humble, and I do around this job for maybe 15 years now. Yeah, and
Okay.
I think the largest chunk of it was being a CTO in two companies. Previous one was called Talkable. I was their CTO for 6 years, and here on Unstoppable, I'm a CTO for 4 years now, and I really enjoy this position. So,
Great.
uh,
Great. So what made you take an interest in technology in the first place?
mhm. well, uh, it began long ago, right in the childhood. I was always like pretty inclined towards the thing that's now called STEM: science,
Yeah.
technology, engineering, and math. Right. So I was like, when I started studying at school, I was more comfortable with all those STEM like disciplines, right? And I really enjoyed doing that, and I didn't like much other disciplines like literature or language. I wasn't very good at that. So I was initially inclined towards STEM. Also, my family is pretty heavy in terms of engineering. My mother at the time was working at electronics plant, and my father, even though he didn't work at his specialty, but he also had a degree, had an education in electronics. And some other family members, they have the similar diploma too, like my uncle. And so I was in this like engineering environment from the very beginning. And later on, like when I had to choose the university, I was like more inclined towards physics, but not engineering. I don't know, maybe because my friends wanted to go there, so I wanted to go with them. But the chances were different. So I applied to two universities, one for the things I wanted, like studying physics, and the other one for math as being my backup plan. And the physics didn't work, and it didn't work in some way that it really didn't like that choice, because the guys I was interviewed by, I didn't like them, and I felt like, well, this is not the environment I want to be in. So I went
Okay.
for more like math type of specialty. It was called system analysis and management, something like this. And even more interesting, there was some bureaucracy in the university that enforced me to change my specialty to finance. That was like a terrible bureaucracy situation. So I
Oh,
had to try myself in finance, and it also like I felt the same way. It's just not the environment I wanted to be in. So I came back to like more like math and stuff. I also understood at that moment that I'm not a hardware guy, right? That it never like really touched me deeply, like working with hardware, all those new devices and trying all of them. And we're more like, I like to work mentally, to
mhm.
maintain those mental constructions in my mind that brings me some kind of interest, or I like those abstract problems or I like understand things deeply at the theoretical level, like for example, like to imagine some information process, how information goes from one place to the other. Because if you imagine, for example, how much transformation, if you like put the data into the web form, how many transformations this data goes before it hits the database, right? But it's only like it's still that information. It's like serialized over a wire several times, first into string and then to some kind of TCP instruction, and then back to some kind of string, and then back to some structure, and then it's validated, and then it passed to the database again. And such a transformations were like I was excited about working with all of them, like imagining how data goes from one place to the other. So then that's called information technology, right? So I
Yeah.
end up here.
Great. Great. Sounds like you were, yeah, it sounds like you were almost kept the engineering in the family. Sounds like your
Yeah.
parents maybe more from a hardware perspective than you were potentially.
Yeah. My mother was a hardware person, and I'm more like software person.
That's great. Does that start any family arguments over who has the better profession, the hardware or the software? Is it
No, not much, not much. I would
fair
even
enough?
say my mother was like suggesting me, like, no, 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 you shouldn't be doing hardware. You're like, your hands are not that, steady.
Yeah. Cool. So can you talk us through your career journey so far? So that's how you got into technology and first took an interest. How did you end up becoming the CTO and co-founder of
Mhm.
Unstoppable Domains? There's obviously quite a
Mhm.
gap there.
Yeah, there were some major turns. I started doing software because my roommate was doing this, and I was
Okay.
kind of interested into what he's doing and how he's doing that. Um, it wasn't very common to have a job at like fourth year in the university. I studied for six, and it was like very comfortable job because I could work remotely. So I tried that, and it worked out pretty well. Even though I was working in more like enterprise companies with Java in the beginning, but I overall I was still excited about software. But at like by chance I switched to Ruby on Rails framework because it seemed very promising in terms of like I saw there was some kind of release new version of the Ruby on Rails, and I read the change log, and like the problems that people were solving there were the problems I was supposed to solve myself in the upcoming years. So I was thinking, well, this is like framework that's somewhat ahead of what I'm currently doing. So I switched doing from Java to Ruby and Ruby on Rails, and it was also like a good idea. And at the moment, it was mainly applied to startups, even though I didn't want to explicitly do startups. I didn't
Yeah.
even know this word before, right? But then I end up doing lots and lots of startups, and it was also like the environment I liked so much more than um, enterprise world.
Okay.
So I
What?
worked
Why
like
is
this.
that?
Why is
Why is
that?
that? Yeah.
Well, it's because no matter which position you take in a company, the larger your company is, the less contribution you will be doing. Even if you are CEO, like the CEO of Google commits so much less to Google than CEO of Unstoppable Domains, right? Because the company is smaller. And so when there's this small environment, you can be fast, you can be impactful, you can be creative, because in a larger company you have to follow the structure, you have to follow the traditions of the company, you have to follow the bureaucracy. I was more like tolerant towards this messy environment where things change all the time, and I was becoming like more involved into the end result. So I believe that I'm like so much more flexible in terms of what kind of role I can take in the company, right? And I can be involved in so much more things and get better at that.
Yeah, that makes complete sense.
Mhm. And so then, after like 5 years working in different startups, I was more like an employee there. I wanted to like get something bigger. So I started to do a lot of open source to kind of promote myself in the community. That was a pretty good idea at the time. Everyone was interested into like open source software to show their skills for tasks that are not like that are public, right? That everyone can see. So I became a contributor of Ruby on Rails. I believe I take the top spot, maybe top 100 contributors of Ruby on Rails, even though I'm
Wow.
not doing this for maybe 5 years already.
Wow.
But that kind of also worked. And so at some point, I was contacted by a person who um, proposed me a CTO position in a company. That wasn't a very, at the moment, it wasn't a super successful company. It was in the crisis where it lost its entire technical team, but the
Okay.
marketing and sales and management was still doing okay. And so they needed a lot of technical work to be completed, and the person who contacted me kind of believed in me, in my values, and in my like positioning myself. So we started working together. That was Talkable, my previous company. Yeah, even though when I was working there, I held the CTO title, but when I left, I was officially promoted to a co-founder. It was
Wow.
interesting case. Yeah, because while I was de facto co-founder, I influenced a lot of things. I had to rewrite the entire software, like 90% of things, and influence the
Yeah.
product a lot.
Yeah, we clearly had a big part to play there, um,
Hmm.
for sure. And then
And
you went from there and then founded Unstoppable Domains, or similar
mhm.
situation again.
Yeah, I was pretty tired of Talkable, and I decided to leave. I believe that for my type of personality or how I work, like working in the company for more than 6 years, it feels like I already put everything I knew to the company, right? So there's nothing more I can do as a founder or executive of a high level, right? I can still be individual contributor or a manager, but I'm not that impactful anymore, because all the things I know, they're already there. People already know what I know. So I left Talkable, and one of the Talkable ex employees contacted me almost immediately, and he said he enjoyed working with me, and he has the new company he started called Unstoppable Domains, and he wants me to join. Um, so it was already 2 years old, but he was okay proposing me a co-founder position. I wasn't initially a CTO, but we both targeted for myself to be promoted there in several years. But still, like like in terms of shares and position, I was a co-founder, even though the company existed for 2 years already. So brought my technical expertise there because the previous technical co-founder that was already there, he was like 21 years old guy who didn't have much experience with really serious problems like team management and big technical challenges. So I was doing all this in Unstoppable since then.
Wow, that's brilliant. I really liked the part where you mentioned that you got hired into that CTO role due to the fact that you were putting yourself out there and doing a lot of open source projects. It's one of the things that I recommend that people do all the time, especially in the Web3 space. You know, put yourself out there, start getting involved in more open source projects. People will start seeing your name. You're involved in the community, um, and yeah, there are a ton of people who are offered positions in very similar ways. Um, is that something that you guys do at Unstoppable Domains as well? Do you look for people who are in the community and people who
Mhm.
are working on a lot of open
So
source stuff?
what I can add is also that when you work on open source, you really grow professionally, because the amount of critics you're going to receive will be immense, right? And you would know so much more when people tell you about their environment and the problems they face. They tell you real problems that you didn't even consider exist. because when we work on a software for our on a closed source software, we always solve one problem. But like, to write an open source library, you have to consider all the possible use cases that are out there. So you grow professionally very quickly when you do open source. Um, and yeah, sorry, what was your question?
No, it was just that. It was just talking through that open
Mhm.
source side of things, and whether or not at Unstoppable Domains you guys would look for people who
Mhm.
contribute a lot to the community and contribute to open source when you're considering people to work for you.
Yeah, yeah, we do. We do. Uh, in my case, I would always look to if there is some open source contributions of the person first, in the first place, other than his resume, because unfortunately, in resume, a lot of people just overestimate their achievements.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I suppose you have to have quite a thick skin to be able to put yourself out there and work on a lot of open source projects, because I can imagine you
Yeah,
get quite a lot of criticism. So
trolling.
you have to be really open to receiving that criticism.
Yeah. And even like trolling and being able to communicate clearly to people or criticize others in a way that doesn't hurt them.
Mhm.
All those skills can be acquired through open source, where the person you're talking to, he's not an employee. He can say whatever he wants. If you will provoke him, that's not good for you. uh, you shouldn't be doing this, whether he's good person or bad person. You just shouldn't be you should be polite. You should know how to handle the conversation
Yeah,
with
for
someone who
sure.
doesn't owe you anything.
No, that's a good way of looking at it. Um, so, what does a day in the life of the CTO co-founder at
Mhm.
Unstoppable look like?
So I'm like, when I was like growing in terms of position, I came to some more different approach to what I'm doing. I would call this like big impact approach, is where usually for several months I'm focusing on a specific area and trying to do a big push in this area, whether it will be better user interface or higher code quality or deliver particular feature if this feature is really difficult. And my work, my day can look drastically different based on what area I will be improving. I'm improving in the moment. So, for example, sometimes it could be even communication, right? I think that the communication in my department and other departments is terrible or just doesn't match the level. So I will be on the meetings all the time trying to make sure our communication level is good enough. And then I will be like, oh, we have this crazy technical challenge, and I will be coding most of the time when I'm focusing on this area. But I really believe in this big impact idea, and I believe that many executive level positions work this way. They find this area where there's a bottleneck in the company, and they focus their attention on that area for a significant amount of time. And it's also a very important skill to know when it's like when it's good at a level where it will not degrade without your direct impact.
So, why did you decide to do it that way? Because I'm sure there'll be a
Mhm.
number of founders listening or senior executives listening who would try and get involved in loads of different aspects of the business and maybe spread themselves too thin. Why did you decide that that was the better way to approach your
Mhm.
day to day?
Well, I found that uh, when you do improvement in certain area, it's very likely that if you don't do certain things, it's very likely it's going to degrade it once you leave. So, for example, if you handle a coin in the air, right, you drop it and it falls, right? So, in order for it there to stay, you have to put some magnetic field or something. You have to reach to the to the level where it's going to work on its own. And it's especially hard when we talk about people. Like, how would people, when would people be educated enough so that you deliver that hanging this coin in the air is really important and they will do it without you, right?
Yeah.
So you have to spend a lot of time to get to people this feeling that whatever you think is important, now they understand that this is important and they will do it themselves. Um, or for
Interesting.
example, on the technical side, you have to improve. For example, you have to improve certain piece of software to the level where doing it incorrectly would be, as it was before, would be more difficult than doing it correctly. Because otherwise it will degrade. It's very likely. Or you have to like convince people that doing it in a bad way gonna cost them too much. But like, some most likely in a software world, I'm trying to more like make it so that the old way is more difficult than the new way. When we talk about processes, I'm more like ideological, so I convince people that certain way of communicating is better. Until they feel it themselves and start doing it themselves, I don't leave. I'm not letting go.
Okay. And how did you get on with making the shift, or how did you get on maybe changing your mindset to be able to focus purely on one thing and not
Mhm.
worry about the other things happening whilst you fix the one thing? Because I can imagine people would try and fix one problem whilst thinking I've got all this other stuff to fix as
Mhm.
well. How did you get around that kind of approach?
Mhm. A lot depends on your skill to prioritize. I remember in one of the companies we were working with another company called Pivotal Labs, and they were putting a huge emphasis on prioritizing. They were doing a task tracker where everything was based on priority, and I really liked that idea because priority is everything in a startup. You can do too many things, and the only question is what you do first, right? So if you get your priority right and you think that this is the worst problem, or this problem, solving this problem will have the most impact, or other problems depend on the solution for this problem, right? If you do this priority right, it's going to be obvious to you that you should focus all your attention, or at least like the majority of it, like maybe 70%, right? You still need to get your cogs running, right? If no one cleans up in the office, that's a problem, right? Uh, but the 70% of your time, or at least this, I call this energy A. Like with energy A, you can do your best. With energy B or C or D, you can only like answer emails in not a, not in a perfect manner. But your energy A should all go to solving this thing, and your energy B, C, and D go to cogs, like to maintain regular things. I don't know, like approve people's vacations.
I like that. That's a good way of thinking about it. The energy A and energy B and C. I like it. So, along with prioritization, what other important skills have you developed throughout your career that have really helped you achieve the position you're in now?
Hmm. Well, I would say I put a huge impact on three things. First is being realistic. Second is being professional, and third is integrity. So
Okay.
it's kind of concept, right? So it works together. You may try it piece by piece, but I like when it's all together. So being realistic for me means that you have to always to evaluate like why certain thing happen. There's an example where if everything goes well or there's some success in a company, most people immediately attribute this to themselves, right? But it's not always the case. You have to be realistic of like why is does did this success happen, or why did we fail, right? So in non-realistic person always think that all the success is attributed to him. This is an extreme, and all the unsuccessful stuff is attributed to others or to environment. But to be realistic, you have to know when it's in the first place your fault or someone else's fault, and it's very difficult to answer to learn the skill immediately. It's like hard to admit your problems. So, and I
Yeah.
was seeing this as a major problem in companies, because they don't have any framework to like, why is this successful? Oh, it's because I was doing right things, so I will continue doing those things, but that's not the reason why something was successful. So you were like targeting the wrong direction. So that's first thing. But second thing will help you with being realistic is being a professional. And I'll explain what I mean. So usually a professional is a person who is has some area when he's like right 90% of time, right? It can be very small, but you have to master this area so much that you're right at least 90% of time in this small area. And you have to know this area where like when you're like in your area of expertise, you say 90% confident that this will happen or this will work or this will not work. In other areas, you have to understand that, well, that's not my area of expertise. So it's likely I recommend, I think that's this is better, but it's not like I'm super confident. And the distinguishing between the two should be made clearly to you, and it will help you being realistic. And you need to expect this from others, right? They also need to be so good in some area to make sure they're always valuable for the company, right? We're always valuable for society. And that's another thing that gives you confidence. It's like when things are rough, when you failed really hard, there's still this area of expertise. You like run right there, stay there for some time to gain the confidence to kind of um, re- refresh yourself, right? Getting confidence and then trying again and make sure that you don't do those mistakes in the area where you're not an expert. Um, that's second thing, and third thing is integrity. So when everyone is like good in one specific area, there's now there are gaps between people, because if everyone gonna be doing only the thing he's good at, there will be places where there's no one, right? No one is good at I can say a lot of areas in Unstoppable where we don't have any good person,
Okay.
and in Talkable too. So now we need to make sure that those areas are covered. It's like when you pass the something from one person to the other, you not just like throwing it at the moment where you're supposed to throw it. You have to make sure the other person takes it, right? That's the integrity.
Yeah.
And the other integrity is who covers the gaps, right? Someone should sacrifice his comfort to cover those gaps and understand that those gaps exist and how to fill them. That's my approach.
I like it. I like it. That's a brilliant. I like that summary. That's a brilliant way of looking at it. And how did you come to that conclusion? Is that just something that you've learned over time, trial and error? Did you read that approach somewhere?
So I started from professionalism because I was like, didn't feel confident in many cases. Like I was accused for things I didn't do,
Okay.
or I was taking responsibility for things I was not responsible for, right? And so I realized that I have to know my boundaries, especially at the early stage of the career. You have to get confident in some specific area to make sure you like you are not frustrated, because you're if you take junior position and you have two senior people, they will tell you different things, right?
Yeah.
And both of them will be more right than you, but you still need to somehow balance between the two. And if you have this area of expertise, if it's like you start very small but then it grows, for example, I will be an expert, I made this feature, I will be an expert in this feature, like in this 10 lines of code, I will perfectly understand what they do, and whenever people ask, I will be like telling them what happens. If I don't know something about them, I will investigate, right? I don't know how much memory they use, I will investigate. So I'll be an expert in this area. And it, well, obviously it shouldn't be super small, but like it need to grow to some extent. Ideally, it should fit some kind of role in the company overall. Like whether you're a designer or software developer, you should like fully cover that role. And then there is like realism. It's like, I don't know. I even like before I started doing software, I saw how people were not realistic about their lives and what kind of problems it lead to them. They were overextending or underextending because they were not realistic why things are happening. So I believe I was always passionate toward that. I saw this as a major problem in other people in success. And
I think just on that, just to add, I've seen it loads and loads of times before. The people who tend to progress quickly and tend to progress well in their careers are people who have a level of self-awareness to understand their flaws, understand where they might be going wrong, understand how things went, why things went well. So yeah, to go along with your realism, I think the self-awareness part of that is massive in helping you achieve your certain career goals, whatever they might be.
yeah. And so the third thing, like integrity, it just comes from professionalism, right? If everyone's professional, you still need to integrate. If like you have 10 professionals in your, you have the best software developer, the best designer, the best QA, the best whoever, it still may not work because they're not integrated together. They are not covering the gaps. So it comes pretty natural if everyone is specialized.
Yeah, you're right. So if you could go back and either learn something sooner or give your younger self a piece of advice, is
Mhm.
there anything you'd say?
Yeah, well, there's very little recent thing I'm learning still is I would call it like emotional intelligence.
Okay.
Um, it all started from me from my daughter. She's 6 years old, but she has some different character from myself. She's very emotional, very creative. She likes different characters, different colors. She likes drawing. So she's like quite opposite. She's also left-handed. So she's quite opposite from myself. And she kind of
Okay.
demands me like to be emotionally intelligent. She wants to communicate emotionally. And I became more like aware of my own emotions. So with her, it's like she says, "Well, I'm sad. I'm angry. I'm like, what do I feel?" And I started to learn this to be aware of what I feel because sometimes I remember there was one interview where I was. It went pretty okay, pretty well, and I was like very positive towards the guy. But then I came home and I felt like I feel like piece of shit. Like, why do I feel this way? Right? There's maybe something I don't understand that's out of mental, like logical, out of logic, right? That's something that I don't understand. And when I was like digging through this feeling, I really realized that the person was fooling me all the time. Like from the very beginning, everything he said was a lie. And only the
Interesting.
emotional intelligence made me think that way. Otherwise, we would hire that person, and who knows what's going to happen. Um,
That's a really
uh,
interesting way
also,
of.
mhm. I also want to
Oh,
do some positive example, not
yeah,
to
sure.
make only negative one. So other thing that I realized with this emotional intelligence is that emotions are deeply personal. So if your direct report feels hurt after a conversation with you, he feels hurt, and whatever you said was a bad idea. Whether you kind of said that he's a hero, he's the best, whatever. If he feels hurt, then it's a problem. So you have to accept this individual world of each person, that you may hurt them with the words that don't hurt other people, and every person is unique, right? And he reacts differently, and you have to know what are like maybe pain points, or receive immediate feedback when you talk some things you consider neutral to the person, and his face just gets sad, right? That's just maybe something wrong about it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point you bring up there, because I think a lot of people maybe struggle with a little bit of the emotional intelligence side of things.
Yeah, software
how do you
developers.
yeah how do you improve
Mhm.
your emotional intelligence?
Well, that was hard journey. I'm not like naturally talented towards that. You know, when you understand, like in software world, the things that you can learn because you have talent, you can learn in 2 days. Other person would struggle for 2 years, right? The
Yeah.
same thing happens for me in the emotional world. Like my daughter can learn some emotional tricks in 2 days. I will be doing this for 2 years. And well, I was so I think one of the things I did, I went to psychologists at some point because
Okay.
I was like too frustrated. So I wanted some external help. At some point, I started doing yoga more on the emotional side, like working with emotions through yoga. Um, Maybe go to some other like practices or like communicating to people more, right? In terms of like not on the subject but just in general, like be aware of what they feel. But if you like want like direct instruments, I would say the two instruments I was using were yoga and psychologist.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And what positive impact have you noticed
Mhm.
as a CTO and as a leader within the business? What positive
Mhm.
impact have you noticed improving emotional intelligence has had?
Well, now I feel myself more free when I express myself. Like now I know that I can criticize this person deeply and it's going to be good for him. But I should never criticize other person because he's criticizing himself so much more than I can, right?
Yeah.
And it becomes more natural. I became less scary to be even angry at some people because I know they're okay with this and that's going to be good for them. To other people's it will not, so I will not be behave this way. So every emotion has its own place, right? I don't have to hold myself too much anymore.
Because I guess alongside that, you also have to learn how each person within your team likes to be communicated with, right? Not only your own emotional intelligence, but also understand how they like to be
Yeah,
spoken to, which I think is
fine.
two different sides of the same coin, probably.
Yeah, yeah.
So if someone is stepping into a leadership role for the first time, is there any advice that you can share with them
Well, my
other than what you've
initial
already shared already?
my initial leadership was terrible. So I feel like I was passionate towards leadership, but I didn't know how to do it.
Okay.
I didn't have good examples, probably, of the leadership. At least didn't pay attention, or the people I was looking at, their leadership style was quite different from myself. For example, my uncle, he had when I was young, he had like a company of like 100 people, and his leadership style is drastically different from what I can accept to myself. So my initial leadership was terrible, and I need to ask for excuses for all the people that were suffering from my leadership at the initial stage. And if you're like me, well, your initial leadership um, tries to lead can hurt people, and you should be thankful to those people that's gonna tolerate the time while you will be learning those skills. I hope
Yeah, that's
not
brilliant
everybody
advice.
though.
No, that's brilliant advice. I think one of the biggest things that I learned when I stepped into a leadership role for the first time was just saying to people, "Look, I'm new at this leadership. I'm new into this leadership role. You know, don't be offended. You know, I won't try and hurt you on purpose. But occasionally, I'm still learning, and I think people then respect the fact that you say, "Look, I don't know everything, but if there's something I don't know, I'll try and help you in any way that I can. You know, I've been in the position that you've been in, so I will try and help where I can. But I'm still learning myself. I think people respect that quite a lot.
Yeah, that's great advice. I didn't do that. and and it wasn't like, at least you were soft on as many things, as many corners as you can. But Yeah, I wasn't doing this. When I was doing a failure, I didn't ask for excuses. I was just blaming myself. And it's
I think that
still
just
like,
came from.
while
I
it
think I
hurt,
must have
hurt
watched.
me, it also hurt others. So
I think that just came from. I think I must have watched a video or listened to a podcast at the time about becoming a leader when I was stepping into that role. And I think I just thought that sounds like an interesting thing. I'll do that. And it seemed to, well, hopefully, I don't really know. Hopefully, it worked out all right. But if they're listening,
for
they
sure,
might say something different.
supposed to have positive impact, like 100%. It helped.
Yeah, for sure. So you moved into a CTO role fairly quickly, right? In your
After
career.
6 years,
Okay.
yeah.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you faced moving into that role, and how did you then overcome them?
Well, I would say a lot of responsibility. The company was small at a time, and I needed to do a lot of things beyond CTO, typical CTO um, routine. Like, for example, find a person who gonna be cleaning up the office, or finding the new office itself, or resolve conflicts. So all of that were on me altogether, and building the team and even hiring. I remember I was involved in hiring a lot, not as an interviewer, but also with an HR.
Okay,
So that was hard.
sure. Do you think you stepped into that role too soon? Looking back, would you have liked a little bit of a longer time in more of a more junior manager position before moving into that role?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It was
Okay,
too early. There was plenty of time, and overall, I recommend people this gradual growth, right? Not, I would even say it's a really bad idea if you're promoted too soon. It's better to stay in a certain position for a certain time, at least for my character. And I saw how other people really failed with this. How, for example, my university mates became CTOs even before myself, and how later on they struggle. If like if you missed a step in your career, that's so much more difficult than slow growth. You will be spending so much more time recovering that step. You will certainly miss certain steps. It's impossible without it, but missing a lot can be critical. You will be super frustrated why you cannot control, for example, your direct reports, because you were not direct report for long enough. So you understand why you are not listening for your manager. So
that's great advice. And do you think you would have learned the emotional intelligence side of the management role sooner if you'd have stayed in a more junior management position? Do you think that would have been coached into you at that point?
mhm. Well, I was extreme. I was denying. It's
Okay.
like, yeah, I was denying that emotional intelligence is important. This is the most terrible thing. It's not like you're just bad at something. You're bad at something and you deny that this is important. So
Okay.
so like I needed to go through some major change in my life to understand that, and that was my daughter. Um, and not so many people are like me, but people that are denying, well, it's not going to help them. Maybe with people like you who are not denying, right? You are right, that's going to help.
No, that's good advice. So during the last or over the last few years, you must have spoken and interviewed tons of people to either come and join you at Unstoppable Domains or any previous roles. What are some of the common mistakes that you see people make when they come to
Mhm.
interview with you?
Well, interesting part was when I was also doing some part of HR work. Early on it was not as bad as it is today. So but anyway, um, usually there are people, well, usually sometimes interview gets for example postponed, right? And there are a few examples where people were like saying something like, please like postpone my interview because of my sickness or something. I usually see this as a sign of irresponsibility. It's like, sorry, I'm sick, can you please move our interviews where the person is attributing the responsibility to himself. But overall, people can show a lot of irresponsibility when they are applying for the interview, especially when it's something goes not according to the plan. They're like blaming the environment, something like this. It's like your health or your family obligation is your responsibility, and just communicate clearly. Like, sorry, my wife is delivering a kid, so I need to be with her. Sorry that I cannot come to the interview. That's pretty responsible. Can sound pretty responsible, but you can also frame this in an irresponsible way. It's like the environment around me is causing me to do something, right? That's one thing. But on the interview, that's quite a different story. So when person is here, I usually go through a flow where I present people uh, first like junior task, then middle task, and then senior task, whatever role it is. So I'm trying to make sure they can solve easy problems, medium problems, and hard problems. And a lot of people, they struggle with the easy problem because they go too ambitious, or because they think this is just too small for them, right? They're like, no. It's like I used to solve big problems. Well, if you can solve small problems, how we can talk about big problems? Uh, and so at this early stage, when people are getting this junior task, whether they show some contempt, whether they show some unfocus, no, they're not in focus. For example, they're trying to solve a bigger problem, more difficult problem, and fail to do this. Like, instead of like solving a small one that I'm asking them to do, they are just lost in this big field.
Mhm.
Um, And then when we come to bigger problems, it's more like about endurance too. It's like if you spend your energy A on a small problem, even though you didn't realize it's small problem, right? You didn't realize that you can solve this in 5 minutes, and instead you were talking about big architecture you were not asked for. So then there's endurance test. It's like now you're getting the hard problem. So what would you do? And suddenly all your skills, when they need to be applied of all those big pictures, they disappear. Um, that's the common problem. People are not doing what they're asked for. First, you have to solve what's you're required to solve, and then maybe go with some extra if you feel confident, but not vice versa.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, if you were to summarize that, then it would be take responsibility. You look for someone who's always responsible, someone who can prioritize, and someone who solves the problem that they're actually being asked to solve.
Well, on the prioritization side, I actually I actually didn't find any person who can prioritize, and it was
Okay.
very difficult for me to acquire that skill. And the only reason I acquired it is because we were working with other company that was called Pivotal Labs, who was doing this like amazingly well.
Okay.
So I honestly don't have this requirement to people, because, and even I struggle to get people to learn it. It takes me like 2 years to teach other people to do that. um,
Wow. So,
yeah,
how's
but other
working in
things,
web? Sorry, go on.
yeah, you are, other things you said were right, yeah.
So, has working in Web3 changed how you believe companies should hire or change your perspective on how they should function?
Mm-hmm. Well, in terms of function, I would say Web3 will impact companies in a very different way. I honestly believe the closer the company is to finance field, the more it will be impacted.
Okay.
For example, I don't know. Some people say that, for example, Web3 is gonna be changing gaming industry. I'm not sure how this is going to happen because people play games because of the lore or because of the different gaming mechanics, right? Not because you can sell your character in a decentralized way. That's not going to change the gaming industry. That's not going to change the lore. That's not going to change like the play, the graphics, etc. Right? But the closer is the company to the finance field or to NFT like artwork field, and especially like not even artwork itself, right? The Web3 is not gonna make Mona Lisa better, right? You still need to draw excellent pictures, excellent drawings to make it work, right? It's not about how you sell it in a decentralized way, at least not the first thing. So the closer you are to the finance, the more you will be impacted. Specifically, like banks or exchanges, they will be impacted in a very significant way. Um, but overall, analogy I also do is I believe that Web3 is like open source for the end user. It's like you regular users, they mostly don't care how many apps in their iPhone are um, open source or closed source, and I believe that it will be the same for Web3. How many technologies are decentralized or not, it will be really important for a small group of people that care about security, right? But others will just rely on their decisions.
Yeah.
In terms of hiring, um, in my perspective, it doesn't change much. I believe that Web3 programming has its own like piece related to security, and it's pretty significant. But for example, if person knows classical programming, learning this piece will be so much more easier for him than to um, go through like this regular programming, like conditional constructions, loops, functions, classes, inheritance. All of that is so much more difficult than what's available in Web3. I remember initially when we were hiring first people, the Web3 expertise was very important. But now it doesn't matter much because we have this expertise and we can share it. But we have no time to teach you when to use while and when to use for each. We don't have, or how to inherit things. We don't have time for that. You should supposed to learn it somewhere else.
Yeah, that makes sense. Could you introduce us to unstoppable domains in a little bit more detail, please?
Yeah, so Unstoppable wants to bring uh, Web3 field to domain names. Domain names are a very common thing on the internet, right? And we believe that the decentralization of domain names need to be a thing. Currently, it's controlled by um, non-profit or profit organizations, right? Enterprise companies. And we believe there needs to be some openness in the field. We believe that everyone should own its own identity in the internet, and domain name is obviously one of those identities, maybe the most common one, and that can work on a blockchain. That's our idea. Um,
Great. And at
so
the moment, that starts with the identity being someone's domain name. Do you guys have plans to move further into the identity part of
mhm.
Web3?
um, well, our like big goal is to make sure like everyone on the planet has the and blockchain domain as an identity, right? And you can use this identity everywhere, wherever it's, I don't know, public or secure enough. Obviously, Google for its employees may have its own identity, but as long as it's public one, you need to have one common that you can own. But on the enterprise side, it can work the same way. It's just have less of a benefit there, right? Because the company still controls your identity, like your email at its own, like
Yeah.
company.com, right? It need to own it. It's by itself, so it's like less valuable there. Maybe some technology will be easier. Web3 technology will be easier to use, but the majority, the real benefit comes for public identities on public websites like Reddit, for example.
Okay. And why did you take an interest in Web3 and the blockchain in the first place?
Well, initially, I wanted to work with the right people that I was working before. I usually think that it's like technology, I can solve this, right? But if there's some people with different values than I am, it's more difficult to solve for me. So, and I didn't pay much attention to Web3 when I was choosing unstoppable domains. But later on, I just received so much fun from working with blockchain because it's really fun to work. It forces you to think differently, think creatively. A lot of things that I didn't know why they exist, for example, now it was clear to me, like why the industry functions a certain way. For example, binary protocols that I was thinking was terrible idea, but now I know what they are for, and they have its own like field of application. So, um, and being this thoroughly is also fun. It's like if you're sending an email today, it's not very fun. But if you're sending an email in the 90s, that would be a challenging problem, and that's what Web3 is. And you're like sending a transaction in Web3 today is like sending an email in the 90s. Oh, you wouldn't be caring about like the design of your email. You would be or different colors. You will be caring about encoding problems and different exchanges not available and service unavailable, something like this. That's what Web3 is right now.
That's quite an interesting point that you bring up there, because in all the conversations that I've had over the last probably year or so, people seem to be quite split. Some people would love the UX side of Web3 to really improve, and other people would like to solve the big challenges first, as if almost like we did with the email, right? You mentioned there sending an email was a challenge 20 years ago, but now it's seamless, it's really easy. Where do you stand on that? Do you think you can solve both problems at once? And should we learn from how the internet was created previously to bring into Web3? Or do you think we need to solve the big problems first? What's your take on that?
Well, I think those problems are of an equal size, actually. I believe we already proved the concept, right? And now it's more about easy to use, especially with the fact that security is a major problem of why Web3 is so difficult to use. It's like it's difficult to enter your apartment because of the security, right? It's not because you want to create problems for your friends. It's because of the security. So the same thing happens in Web3. That's why the UI is so terrible, is because the security is so good.
Okay.
And solving UI problems without sacrificing security is where's the challenge. Because we saw so many proposals that makes things easier to use, but they are insecure, or things that are improving security but make the UI so much more terrible.
Yeah, I suppose it's tricky, isn't it? Because to bring more users into Web3, do you do you always have to keep the keys and the 12 words that you have and this kind of stuff to get into your wallets and things? Do you keep that? Is there a way to then reduce the amount of things you have to remember? But then, as you mentioned, then the security side of things suffer. Um, yeah, it's an interesting problem.
With Web3, you can choose yourself how much security you want, right? That's the difference between Web2 and Web3. So, for example, in Web3, you may choose to have a bank or not to have a bank, and having letting the bank having a more superiority to you, to your account, or not, right? And
Yeah,
it's your choice now. Obviously,
yeah, that's
like to people that are not proficient in technology, we will always be proposing like, oh, you can still have the bank, right? Or maybe the only benefit is that you may switch from one bank to another without moving your money anywhere, right?
mhm.
You just approve a different person to manage your account, and that's it.
Interesting. So, is there anything that you would change about Web3?
Mhm. Well, I believe the biggest design flaw of Web3 is different technologies for connecting your wallet, like Web3 JS or Wallet Connect, and maybe there are a few others. You usually, like when you connect your wallet, you have a lot of logos of different companies. And so what's even more problematic is that all of them are having major problems to me, that cannot be solved because they are more about specification than about new version of software. So, and now like having the ultimate one protocol that's gonna eliminate all others is difficult, is unlikely, right? Because those protocols got popular, and it's also no one yet knows that we found all the problems with those protocols, so they pop up like mushrooms after the rain, and no one. I personally, I don't know how it's gonna end, and who will be proficient enough to fix this.
Yeah. Well, I suppose we're still really early, right? I mean, over the
Yeah,
next 4, 5, 6 years, there's going to be so much innovation
sure,
happening. The
sure.
landscape will probably of Web3 will probably look very different to what it looks like now.
Mhm. Yeah, but here the problem is in the spec, right?
Okay.
You may change the UI, you may release the new version of software, but specification is so much more difficult to change. When the JSON is going to support dates, right? That would be, I'll move my birthday to this date.
So, as a leader in Web3, if you could wrap up all of the advice that you've shared today,
Hmm.
is there any advice that you could give to someone looking to follow in your footsteps?
Hmm. Well, I would say don't put too much focus on Web3 if you want to become a leader in Web3. It's more
Okay.
about you want to become a leader, because Web3 may be temporary in your life, and a commitment to become a leader can be longer than your job at Web3. So much longer. And I know how, for example, Web3 applies to software development process or to product, because it impacts those things a lot, but it impacts leadership indirectly, right? So because how your leadership style would supposed to change if you are concerned, if you are a company, if security is a huge deal for your company, right? Your leadership style should be more confident. You have to choose the processes that are more stable and resilient to changes. Your review process has to be stronger, but all of that impacts your leadership in an indirect way, right? You have to deliver this message of like, hey, security matters. You have to remind people all the time that it matters, but it's more like, I'm not sure if it considers like a leadership thing. Probably a little bit.
Okay. And if you were to give the same advice to someone who's looking to build a technical career in Web3 without the leadership side of things, is there any advice that you can offer someone?
Hmm. I would say start Web 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Why is that? Is because Web 2 programming style is so unstable and so new that best practices do not exist.
Okay.
Whatever people are doing today will unlikely to be um, great idea in 5 years. And if this is the first thing you learn, right, um, it's difficult. Like you learn it for 5 years, and then you are told that this is no longer a good practice, right? That's not going to happen if you learn classical Web 2 programming, and whatever you learn there will be needed in 5 years, and is going to naturally go into Web3, right? A lot of practices. I remember there was the case where one person was explaining me Web3, how you can call, how you can call one contract to the other, and how you can change the address of one contract within the other, and it's going to be changing the logic because you will be calling a different contract. And he spent like 30 minutes explaining this to me, and I was like, oh, dependency injection. So you explained dependency injection to me. Okay, that's that's pretty
Stuff you've been
known
doing
thing,
for
but
a
we are
while.
like inventing completely new terminology for all of that, right? And trying to explain it with different words.
That's brilliant advice. Well,
Mhm.
well, Bogdan, thank you very much for your time today. You've shared some brilliant insights there, some great advice. It was great to learn more about your journey. If people want to reach out to you, if they're listening and they have any further questions, are they okay to drop me a message on LinkedIn or Twitter or anything like that?
Yeah, that would be interesting to me too, to see people questions, what they are thinking or what they would want to hear more about. Um,
Great.
yeah,
Brilliant.
if you think it's going to be good to have Q&A session, I'm also open to that.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much for your time. It was great to speak,
You too.
and I'll speak to you soon. Take care.
Good luck.
Bye.